Welcome to the third National History Day in Idaho webinar this fall of 2017. This webinar will be covering research resources that are available to students and teachers who are researching a National History Day project. Several of these are new resources, so even if you feel like you know everything there is to know about research, you might not know about these new resources from groups that have partnered with National History Day to make it easier for students to access the primary sources that they have. If you have any questions as we're going along, you can type it into the public chat window and we'll answer your questions as they come up. I want to introduce you to Kate Lang. She is the new Assistant Coordinator for National History Day in Idaho. She is an alum of National History Day. She competed at the national contest, and she's also been a judge for National History Day. So we're happy to have her, and she'll be hosting this webinar. So take it away, Kate.
All right, so like Joanna said, I'm going to be talking about some research strategies, what you're looking for in the sources that you're working with, and then I'm going to give you some resources for where to find them. I want to start with the types of resources that you're going to need for your history project. Of course, we need background information as well as those primary and secondary sources. And I just wanted to give an overview of each of these because I have had some questions about, what counts as a primary source? Is this a primary or secondary source? So background information is a collection of primary and secondary sources. So this is things like encyclopedias are usually the best answer, and you're going to be using these to get some of your basic facts outlined, get some context for your project, and then you're going to probably move into secondary sources, and these are usually interpretations and evaluations of primary sources. So they're things that were written or created after the fact that are doing analysis of the primary sources or of the time period itself. These are not usually written by people who were there at the time, and that's one of the big separators between them and primary sources. So primary sources are original and unfiltered materials from the time period that you're looking at. So these are things, of course, like photographs. These are interviews with people who were there, newsreels from the time that you're looking at. And what's important about having all three of these sources in student research is that the background and secondary sources provide context for your project, and the secondary and primary sources provide analysis. So your projects will be most effective if they're not only telling us what happened, but giving us an analysis of what it meant that happened. So you want to be able to tell me that Pearl Harbor was a thing that happened and tell me all the facts about it, but you also want to tell me why it was an important turning point for the U.S.'s entry in World War II, and other cultural context that makes it relevant so that you can show us the impacts of that historical happening. So once you have a background, secondary, or primary source, it's important to run it through a test to make sure that these are useful pieces of information that we're using, making sure that they're credible. I like to use the STAR test. It's similar to the CRAP test that I know that they use a lot. This one looks at, first, sufficiency. Is there enough information for the source to be useful? Second, typicality. Is this information matching up with all of the other information that surrounds this topic? Accuracy. Do we know from other sources or from our own research that these are real facts? And then relevancy. We need to check whether or not this source in particular is actually going to be profitable when we use it with our topic. So those are a couple things that we can look at. There are, of course, a number of other factors in deciding whether or not a source is going to be useful. Some that can be difficult to work through are things like bias. Is this a highly opinionated piece on a historical happening? Satire, is this a humorous piece? Is this meant to be a joke and not to be taken seriously? Is there enough supporting evidence to justify using this, or is this kind of just that one source that you found way deep in the internet that may not have as much relevancy as you want it to? And then is your author a credible source to be receiving this from? Of course, you don't want to just read, Jim Bob's thoughts on the Vietnam War. You want to have someone who has some credentials and some credibility, who's done their research, so that while you do your research, you're always getting the best information. So we, of course, have on our website a teacher toolkit that we've talked a lot about. It's got a lot of really great resources that you can access. We have a whole section in there on selecting resources, which is really, really useful. It's helpful as a teacher to be able to come up with a research plan so that you can diversify the types of information that your students are getting. It is difficult for a student to build a good project if they're only, for example, like if they only have background information from an encyclopedia. That's not going to be able to provide them enough information for their analysis. So it's important that as an educator you come up with some kind of plan or path for your students to follow in developing their research strategies. And we have a lot of options for these types of things on our website here. So we've got things, this is what our webpage looks like, a little screenshot from it. We have, research strategy worksheets, background research, what to do once you have a primary and secondary source, how we can organize them. And then, of course, a paperwork system. So how are your kids going to take notes? Where are they going to keep those things once they've found the information? So, for example, if you were to click on this Teaching Primary and Secondary Sources lesson plan, we already have this fully developed PDF that you can go into, and it's got activities in there already. It's got definitions for students. It's easily adjusted to various grade levels. So it's a really helpful tool, and there are a number of other resources on the page as well that you can look at. So once you know how your students are going to approach their research and what kind of things they should be looking for, I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of sources that I really like so that you know what's out there as you and your students begin the research process. So like I said, we have created this research resource PDF. You can find it on that teacher toolkit. It's titled Research Resources Web. And what I've done is gone through and organized a number of websites by category. So you can look at general history, Idaho history, U.S. history. We've got ancient history on there, European history, women's history, African American history. So I've tried to make sure that in each of these segments we've covered all of the big topics, and that there's at least one or two sources. So if your student is struggling trying to find a primary source on their specific topic, hopefully we've got at least some base covered for them. So for example, we have a whole section on settling the West in the United States. If you scroll down there, you're able to click on one of the resources. We'll look at this one here. I like looking at photographs. They're my favorite of the primary sources. So it'll take you to this Library of Congress website, and it has all of these pictures from the 1800s, and you're able to search through this collection by topic, by year, by the place it was taken, by the photographer who took it, and it gives you a very specific look into some primary sources from that time period. And they've got all kinds of photographs in this selection, so whatever your topic was for that year range, there's something interesting to either add context or give you fuel for your analysis. So there are a couple other sources. The ones I'm focusing on right now are primarily oriented around primary sources. So this one here is the Smithsonian Learning Lab. It might take me a second to pull it up so I can kind of walk you through the website itself. But this one is great. Smithsonian has so many topics under its belt. So there are, whatever you're looking at, if you're looking in science, if you're looking in cultural history, the Smithsonian Institution has just incredible collections of all of these things. But The reason I like this one is that its focus is to first provide students with primary sources and then to focus on giving them paths for analysis with those primary sources. And again, that's one of the biggest things that's going to separate, a good project from a great project is the ability to have analyzed these primary sources, shown us what it means contextually, and make sense of the impacts of these historical happenings. So give me just 1 second here, and I'm going to pull up that website. So this here is the Smithsonian Learning Lab. It's very, very aesthetic, very pleasing to look at, and it's really easy to navigate, so that's what I like. This over here, the Discover, we'll start there. This just gives you all kinds of things to look at. And it's a great way if you have students who are at the beginning of their project who don't really know what they're interested in or what they want to look at. Starting with the Discover tab here is great because it just shows you some interesting pictures. And let's say I'm interested in this one, so I'll click on it, and it will take me here, and it gives me lots of options for saving this photo, which is great for students who are collecting research, but they have really large compilations of all kinds of research about this, or about lots of subjects. So that's a resource that I really like there. If you're not using the Discover tab, there is this Create tab, and this is really great because it lets you, there are informational videos on how to use each of these sections, but it's great because it lets you create a collection. So this is a good activity for students because they can run through each of these, they can run through pictures and they can kind of combine them in a way that makes sense to them, which is a great way that students can work with analysis, is understanding why do these pictures fit together? Why would I create a collection out of these? What is the narrative that these pictures are telling me? So we can look at one of those here. So this one is about continuity and change in Los Angeles. And, it gives the student, the ones that are pre-created, give the student questions to do some analysis with. It'll take you to Google Maps. It'll take you, there are documents included that you can download that give histories. So this collection tab is really, and the creation tab is really the one that I think is most useful for students once they already have a topic selected. The Smithsonian has already done the work of putting together useful topics for them. So I'll switch back here. The next one that I wanted to look at is this National Archives Docs Teach. And I think that this one is particularly useful for teachers because it has lesson plans already made, and that's awesome. So some of the things that you're able to do here, you can just explore, with the Learning Lab, you can just look through primary source documents. This one has activities already created. What I really like about this is that you can, if your whole class is working on the Civil War, you can run through just Civil War era. But it's great because you also have thinking skills that you can be working with. So making those connections to your Common Core standards is much easier when you can already say, I'm working with analysis and interpretation here. That one is already taken care of. And then it shows or it gives you different types of activities that can relate to these skills, which is great. And then, of course, they also have it differentiated by grade level. So if you're in a fourth grade classroom, there's still going to be access to primary sources because I know there can be barriers to that when you're working with younger students who haven't really engaged in, analyzing or analyzing historical documents before. So I love that this gives you the ability to differentiate, to be selective about the thinking skills and activity types that you use, and to have a comprehensive list of historical eras for students to work with. So then I'll move back here, and the other one is the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History. This is one that I found recently and just started exploring. It also has it's all primary sources, which is great. It is a institution that has been private. It started out as a private collection, and then they've expanded it with extra funding and those kinds of things. And they do because it was initially a private collection. You do need to register for an account with this one. But if you are a K-12 teacher or a student, your registration is free, and you get access to all of the primary source documents in this database. So that's a really great feature. I love when stuff is free for us. So let me jump back over to this. So this is great. What I like about this one is it also works with early history, which can be difficult to find primary sources on for a lot of students. So it's pretty easy to find primary sources from the Civil War on, or even from the Revolutionary War on. But when you're looking at like the initial landing of Columbus, it can be kind of difficult to, it's going to make me log in, so I won't do that right now. But the landing of Columbus, if you click on that, it will pull up an entire letter that Columbus had sent back to the King and Queen of Spain, and you can read that in, you can read the type of language that it was described in to give you good context for that historical topic, and all of this is really ripe for analysis. And because they are organized by era, you're able to look at individual primary sources, but also to look at multiple primary sources at once to draw conclusions about what the era itself was like, which is really helpful for that analysis process also. So the next one is more locally oriented. The Idaho State Archives has a great digital collection. They are working on expanding it right now, so as time goes by, there are going to be more and more resources available here. Of course, you are able to, students can come visit the archives. They have the physical collections there with quite a few more photographs. So if you're doing a topic like exhibits or documentaries that are really visual, I think that's a really useful tool if you've got a local topic. So I will go ahead and show you how to navigate this. So this one can be a little more difficult for students to find something direct because these collections can be fairly broad. But when you are able to find sources from the digital archives, they are really, really cool. It's a lot of stuff that we don't usually see about Idaho history. I've found a house that I used to live in when it was initially built, so that was cool. A lot of people do house research with it. You can look up a lot of famous Idahoans, and it's really interesting to watch the development of Idaho and the progression there. So another great way to add context and analysis. So I'll go ahead and look in at this browsing collection. Let's see. If we want to browse the entire collection, they've got titles of them and descriptions as well. So, for example, this is Main Street in Boise, and you're able to zoom in, zoom out. They've got date, it's a painting, so they have information about the medium, the date, the format, and they're usually very well documented, which is great. So if you're doing an Idaho topic, that's one of the first places that I would suggest looking for those specific primary sources. So another one that we have here is Boise State University's special collections. If you are in the Treasure Valley, it's great because you're able to, you can talk to the librarians. The library itself is open to the public. Special collections does require that you have appointments made so they can make sure they have the materials available. But they do have great online resources as well, again, primarily dealing with things that happened in Boise. Another thing is that the Boise State Library, the Albertsons Library's website, and the Special Collections website gives you the ability to look through the research guides that they've created for their university students. So if you're student is researching a specific topic, you can search to see if the Albertsons Library has a research collection already made. That'll give you links to databases that they found useful in researching that topic and some questions that you can look into with those topics. So let me see here. It's got to switch over to the archives. One second. My link is open. Okay, so this is the Special Collections website. They also have a digital collections, which is great. Again, it's a lot of local history and university history. They do have manuscript collections, which is very interesting if you're looking for letters, journals, diaries, scrapbooks. Boise State's collection of these are awesome, especially from any notable Idahoans. This is a great place to go look for their original works or journals, that kind of thing. And then if you're interested in Boise State's history, they've got a huge selection of information on that. And then, like I said, the Albertsons Library itself is open to the public, so if you are looking for a book, you can always go find it there. They've got 3 or 4 floors, all full of books, and a really great selection of historical books, especially if you're looking for things like it says here with Basque history and culture, or those really specific Idaho topics that you're not able to find on the internet even. There are great collections at the Boise State Library for that. So then, the last one I want to look at is the Boise Public Library. They have a digital resource ethnic history collection, which I think is really interesting. If you're looking at we have a lot of Chinese, Basque, and Latino histories here in Idaho. And the Boise Public Library has one of the best collections of photographs and newspaper clippings chronicling that experience in Idaho. So let me pull up this. So again, this is another online digital archive. You are able to search through by year, by title, by group, but they've got these really great things. They have old newspaper clippings and stories. They've got photographs. It is a lot of newspaper clippings. Here's one called Art of the Dance, and this is going to cover some Basque history in Idaho. And they even have fairly contemporary newspaper articles, which is great. Because you can make comparisons between the way, or I guess the discourse of, the newspapers in the past and the way that those ethnic groups are talked about or the way that those histories are relayed now. So that's another great spot that students can do some analysis. So if you have other questions about research resources, again, check out our teacher toolkit that has that whole list of the categorized research resources, and you're welcome to email either Joanna or I with any of questions looking for more resources.
Thank you very much, Kate. You did a great job. That was really helpful. If you are watching this webinar at home and you have any questions, like Kate said, please email us. And just to make you aware, this is the 3rd webinar that we have available for you. If you are a new teacher, there's a webinar about how to implement National History Day in your classroom. There's another webinar about the nuts and bolts of the National History Day research process and a lot of tools to help you guide your students through the research process. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have another series of webinars in the spring, primarily dealing with contests. And so look for those, and thank you so much, and best luck researching.